The identification challenge is made even more difficult by the fact that sex trafficking is a hidden population that coexists within the larger commercial sex industry, which is also, to a lesser extent, a hidden population with zero good data. And even if you had good data temporarily, the industry is constantly evolving. Moreover, it's really like drugs in that it is a market. You have traffickers supplying something to buyers. But instead of, heroin or cocaine, that something is a sex act with a human being. And sex acts are a sort of normal legal thing in society. This means that effective networks blend in completely with their surroundings. So like terrorism, it's nearly impossible to identify without technology and information on the ground. But unlike terrorism, there are not multiple government agencies dedicated solely to identifying and dismantling trafficking networks. And so it really is kind of left up to a decentralized group of entities mandated to do something about it. And these different entities might notice one or two small red flags that alone wouldn't really signal trafficking. It's only once it's taken all together that you can see it as this potential trafficking situation. So within each of these segments, the network structure can manifest in different ways, which can help us to determine trafficking risk levels. For example, if you have a truly independent provider, then the network consists of one node, meaning that they do not work with other sex providers. This provider is essentially self-employed. However, it's extremely rare that a provider in the industry works completely alone. Often they'll have these close relationships with other providers in the industry for safety and information sharing, really. And sometimes independent providers may even work together for a brief period of time in a sort of partnership. For example, they might advertise together in multiple person specials to entice new buyers and provide some safety. What defines this structure, though, is that it is multiple self-owned businesses working together briefly in partnership where there's no hierarchy. This means that providers kind of do their own thing when they're not together, and their patterns will not move outside of these brief partnerships. The most critical sex provider characteristic that's related to trafficking is age. Minors in the industry are always trafficking victims. And while research really shows that minors rarely enter into the industry without a facilitator actively recruiting them and breaking in, they may or may not be part of an actual network. Recall this independent provider network structure. This could be a homeless youth selling sex to survive, or it could be like a well-known adult film star selling escort services to high-dollar clients. The difference matters. If this person is a minor, then they are de facto a victim. The sex buyer in this case is defined as a trafficker, along with anyone who may have recruited or facilitated them in being in the industry. The internet has largely replaced other means of buying and selling sex because it's safer and it reaches a broader range of customers. From a research and an investigative angle, online ads provide visibility for some of the population that would otherwise be more hidden. Since the overwhelming majority of the industry is advertised online, this is what we've been capturing since 2015 by using web crawling to automatically detect, scrape, and process commercial sex ads at scale. While the specific sources have changed quite a bit, which I'll mention later, most of our data at the time of the case that I'll go through today came from Backpage.com. And Backpage, for those who are unfamiliar, it was a website similar to Craigslist that one estimate showed that it accounted for 80% of all online commercial sex advertising. So it was sort of the big hub. And there was also substantial evidence that trafficking victims had been advertised on the site, to include adults and minors. Minority communities are overrepresented in the pool of sex providers. For example, African Americans make up 13% of the US population, and yet they represent 33% of those on Backpage. This overrepresentation is really exacerbated in Nebraska, where African Americans make up 50% of the Backpage sex provider population. Since ads really cater to the tastes of consumers, they provide insight into the market demand. The fact that providers are advertised with euphemisms suggesting their youth, despite the well-known risks of law enforcement, that means that youth is a very important characteristic sought by sex buyers. In fact, there's even a premium on it. The younger the sex provider, the higher the hourly rate they are able to advertise. And this effect is the strongest among very young women, ages 18 to 25. But it goes away entirely once a woman is over the age of 30. This has some serious consequences. It creates incentives for traffickers to recruit younger females, and it also means that the industry experiences high turnover owing to the dramatic decline in demand as the provider is less able to be marketed as youthful. So the commercial sex industry is constantly evolving in response to technological change, the market, and law enforcement efforts. For instance, when Craigslist went down, it took down its adult section in 2010. Online commercial sex ads really moved to Backpage.com. And then when credit card companies stopped processing transactions with Backpage, the website began accepting advanced cash payments in Bitcoin. When Backpage was shut down and subsequent legislation was passed, online commercial sex ads moved to a more decentralized set of largely offshore websites. And in 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we really saw that the financial duress attending the crisis has brought many first-time entrants into the industry. One of the major lessons learned is how critical machine learning is in helping to kind of reduce the amount of work that needs to be redone with every slight change in the industry. And so we've rebuilt our system to be more robust. Really, the most successful set of cases occurred when we worked alongside our law enforcement partners to turn a lead into a prosecution in a sort of iterative fashion, because new information that they uncover may connect a few dots and change the understanding of the overall network. And that is really extremely helpful for those on the ground who are having these conversations to determine the potential of force, fraud, and coercion. Identifying trafficking, it requires long-term support services and a community working together, which requires collaboration tools. And so that's what we built. Pave is not only intended to improve a community's detection of and response to a potential situation of trafficking, but it also really allows us to understand those segments of trafficking that won't show up online, like the residential neighborhood brothels that operate through word of mouth and often are trafficking children. I mentioned earlier that immediate self-disclosure of trafficking victimization is extremely rare, but it does become likely over time if someone is connected to services where their basic needs are being met. And that's exactly the process that Pave facilitates. We've essentially built an ecosystem that takes everything that we do to detect and understand trafficking in the broader sex industry, and it integrates that in with everything that law enforcement is learning through the investigative process, as well as what hospitals, child welfare agencies, and victim services, as well as what they're seeing in a community. Because not every situation can or should be solved by law enforcement. Altogether, this ecosystem really helps to uncover hidden populations and that may or may not be advertised online, but are being exploited in plain sight. If there's one thing that you take away from this talk, I hope that it's not that tech is going to save the world. Research is also not going to save the world. And I say that as a data scientist who spent their 20s building a research and technology company. But research and technology can be thoughtfully embedded in frontline efforts to combat these problems so that facilitates their changing the world.